periodically looking up here at the corner of the screen because people are still trying to come in and get into the meeting. But appreciate folks starting. Stuck at home, a bunch of us, I think, getting cabin fever, that sort of thing. And I thought it might be fun to try to get together. We just had the 56th anniversary of the 64 World's Fair, and I thought we'd put this together. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation. I'll start, and hopefully that will all go well. It seemed to go reasonably well the other day. Carol, if anything horrible goes wrong and I'm not seeing it, you can run down from the West Wing and let me know. So share screen. I'm going to look for my, let's see, where is the PowerPoint? There it is. Share. Okay, here we go. So, okay, if anybody else shows up, I think I get a little warning at the top of the screen, but we'll go into this and give it a try. Just to give you a little background information for the folks that do know me, you're going to be bored and you can find out any mistakes I make. But for the folks that don't know, again, I'm Bill Cotter. I started working for Disney back in 1976. And it kind of was an interesting situation. I went to the World's Fair a lot as a impressionable 12 and 13-year-old and really had a great time. I went to the fair as often as I could. Had an uncle who was into photography and liked to explain to my aunt why he had to get another camera because he had to give me his last one. So I really started taking a lot of pictures of the fair. All the bad pictures in my collection are the ones I took back at 12. But went to the fair. I think it had a big impact on me becoming a electrical and computer engineer. And then I, like everybody else, left the fair, went to college, and moved on. Well, a couple of years later, got out of college, and I was working as all things as a nuclear weapons designer for the U.S. Navy on ballistic missile submarines. We had a day off that we weren't able to do a planned launch. Everybody else wanted to go to Disney World to go play golf. I don't golf, so I went over to see Mickey. And I walked in, and there was the Carousel of Progress, and there was Mr. Lincoln, and there were monorails and everything. And I said, my goodness, this is just like the World's Fair. So being an entrepreneur, I spent the money on a souvenir gift tie, went to the casting department, applied for a job, thinking I could program the country bears and that sort of thing. And the next thing I know, Disney hires me to head up their worldwide computer security. So they moved me out to California. As soon as I got to California, they needed me back in Florida. It was, that's sort of a craziness, but it was great because I would spend a month at Disneyland. I'd spend a month at Disney World, a month at Imagineering, back to the studio, over to Disney World. And it worked out to be great. So this picture here was, I had just moved out here. My car still has New York license plates on it. But I said, my goodness, this is really great. I get the best parking spot I've ever had for any of my jobs. So flash forward a number of years, I left Disney, went off and done other things. Mostly, I still freelance for Disney and history type projects. But Disney started realizing that a lot of the current cast members don't really have any idea about the connection between the Disney of today and the World's Fair connection. And that's like we put together a presentation. So a friend of mine, Debbie Del Mar, who I think has joined us, was very good in helping me organize that with the folks from Disney. We did it in the Disney theater, taped it, and have broadcast it around. So we thought I'd go back and talk about how Disney and World's Fairs have come together. So let's see here. We'll start back in 1933, 1934 in Chicago at the Century of Progress Exposition. This is a very interesting picture because for a while, in talking to my friends from the archives, there was not a lot known about Disney's participation in early World's Fairs. There were no archives back in 33. They were not recording this stuff. So a lot of the stuff we started finding out through circumstance. But I was restoring this picture here, and it's a nice picture of a children's area, a little train going around and that. But I spotted something over on the side that I thought was interesting. A Mickey shop, the first Disney store. And it was kind of interesting to spot this because we were trying to figure out, what did that mean? What do they do there? What other Disney sort of attractions there were at the fair? The archives was able to establish that Walt had gone to the 34 fair. He previously had the connection. His father helped build the 1898 Chicago World's Fair. but there wasn't a lot known about what Disney actually did or saw at the 33, 34 fair, and then we started digging into it. So found this picture, and we said, okay, one of the things we found out that a big thing at the 33 fair were Ingersoll Mickey Mouse watches. They actually had a shop there that you could go and pick a watch, and they would make it in front of you, and you could take your watch home. And these Ingersoll watches are very famous, that they help keep the watch company alive. And I don't know the distinction. Some of you guys are talking about the distinction between the A map and the B map and the C map. Well, there's distinctions. You can tell whether or not your Mickey Mouse watch actually came out of the 33 World's Fair. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I got a souvenir from the 33 World's Fair, a Disney souvenir, and unfortunately what you have is a fake. It wasn't called World Fair Chicago. It was called the Century of Progress Exhibition. It would have said World 'S Fair. So the archives just hates this knife because people are constantly asking them for information on it, and it's one of the big known Disney fakes. There was also a little gallery for the kids to go and get their pictures taken or meet Disney. For my friends at Disney, I think we would have to say this is probably about as off-model as you could come up with. So we figure somebody else painted it other than the Disney artist, but it's different. I'll be kind and leave it at that. But one thing we did uncover was this ad which ran in a newspaper in Chicago in November of 1933. And it's very interesting. If you look over at the bottom corner, it says extra added attraction on seeing how Mickey Mouse and 3 Little Pig cartoons are made. Up at the top, it mentions direct from the Century of Progress. So this was a show that was done at a Gimbel's department store in Chicago between the 2 seasons of the World's Fair in Chicago. And we're still trying to find some more information on it. I figure it's a rainy day research project, but unfortunately, I don't think it's going to rain here for about the next 9 months. But it's kind of interesting that we did not know there was a Disney show at the fair. It's not in any of the guidebooks that we found or anything that showed up in this department store ad. So, oh, by the way, Walt did go to the 34 fair. He went to the San Francisco 39 World's Fair. But the archives has been unable to establish if he went to the 3940 New York World's Fair or not. So we figured if he went, there'd probably be a picture, but so far they've not uncovered anything in particular. But the 39 World's Fair was a major undertaking. Just go through a few background photos of it. These are the theme structures. The tall one is the Trilon, the big circle is the Perisphere. Massive structure. If you see people up next to it, this thing was absolutely incredible in size. And one of the things that's really incredible about it is it's all done in the days of slide rules and no computers. And I actually have a copy of the blueprints for the Perisphere. And one of the things we were trying to figure out was how strong to build it, because New York gets snow in winter and they get very high winds in winter. And they were trying to figure out how many feet of snow could sit on the roof of this thing before it would fall down. Again, a building you're going to build, tear down 2 years later, and still have to spend a lot of money on it. Parachute jump, now the symbol of Coney Island. You'd go up to the top on this, you would pull a ripcord and you would drop yourself down. In actuality, the ripcord didn't do anything. It was just attached to a bolt. But my father went on this as a kid and didn't know it. He and his other buddy, very brave, we're cool, nothing's going to bother this. They went up to the top of it, and they sat there and they pulled the cord and the cord and the cord, and nothing happened. But they've been a little bit too much of a wise ass to the operator on the ground, who let them sit up there just long enough to scare themselves and finally they dropped down to the ground. He said it was his one and only time to go up there. So anyway, these people are happy. Now they're happier than some other people who went there. This one guy and gal went up there and got stuck on the thing and had to be taken down by the fire department. I forget how high this thing is, 10, 12 stories in the air. Unfortunately, he was not with his wife and she was not with her husband, and they made the newspapers about being stuck up there. So you can imagine, it'd be bad enough trying to explain to your wife where you were last night, stuck at the office, and now you show up on the front page of the New York Daily News. So you also, at the 39 Fair, you had Electro. He was the robot at the Westinghouse Pavilion. The man over to the right is speaking to a screen that would pick up his voice vibrations, and he would tell Electro, raise your left hand, raise your right hand, turn your head. And Electro could actually even smoke a cigarette. So they had mechanisms here that they could come back, see the guy talking here. Sorry, people are sending me some messages here at middle. Some more people coming in. So anyway, Electro was the robot from the fair. He was very popular, and in the next season of the fair, they actually gave him a robotic dog, so he had fun. One of the favorite exhibits, I would love to see this in a theme park today. This is the S1 Pennsylvania Railroad locomotive running at full power on a set of rollers. So that steam's coming out because this steam engine is going full bore right next to these people. So for all of us that have worked in theme park design, and you know how you have to be so safe and everything, can you imagine, hey, let's put an attraction where this thing's on a set of rollers going full power, blowing live steam into the face of everybody that walks by. I would have loved to have seen that. Being a train nut, I would have really enjoyed it. The 39 fair is right when color photography came out. And one of the things you could do is go and get a free roll of Kodak film, and hopefully you get yourself hooked on it and go buy more of it. The 39 fair also had something you don't see a lot. If you look at the left-hand picture, it says sun worshippers. That was the polite euphemism for the nudist colony. All these men and a few women standing off to the right, they're all looking at a woman attempting to come into a strip show. So things have certainly changed, but this is the sort of thing when Walt got to Disneyland, he made up his mind. None of this carnival atmosphere, none of these strip shows, the girly, stuff. He wanted a wholesome, clean sort of fair. At the 39 World's Fair in New York, he did a cartoon, Mickey Surprise Party, and was shown for Nabisco to do all their crackers and various odds and ends. But they didn't have any particular real show or attraction there. Sadly, 39, 40 fair is falling apart in this picture. The fair ended. There was no chance to do any sort of expansion or anything else going on. Some more people coming in. This is interesting, both doing the talk and running the Starship Enterprise here at the same time. So it's so they ended the World's Fair. They tore it down. The center circle is where the Trilon and Perisphere used to stand. The building off to the left is the New York City Pavilion. Became the first home of the United Nations, but this desolate wasteland was left. It ran so out of money they couldn't even pull up all the roads or do anything with the grounds. 1950s, it was pretty dismal, kind of an empty, forgotten part of New York, but luckily we'll see in a few years that we were able to fix that with another World's Fair. So we jump back to 39 again, but we now are going a little north up to San Francisco, the Golden Gate International Exposition. This was on a man-made island in San Francisco Bay, and they had a Disney participation here was a little different. They didn't have a cartoon, although they ended up showing the cartoon in the second year of the fair. But for this one, if you went to a standard oil station, you would pick up a sticker and put it on the board here and try to complete your race with your friends who were also competing stickers to see which was the first of you that could get out to Treasure Island. And it had some great artwork on the back, the same artists that were doing the Good Housekeeping pages with the Disney stories. So very, very nice collectible piece of material from that fair. World's Fairs then stopped for a while. They had a little thing come along called World War II, and World's Fairs were not being particularly something that the world was worried about. So after the war, Brussels decided to show the rest of the world that Europe was not completely war-torn. They were going to come up with a World's Fair. And this is the United States Pavilion. Wonderful pavilion. They spent a fortune on getting a world-named architect. I think it's Edward Durrell Stone to build it. And then they came up with the problem that they didn't have anything to put in it. Really, within that pavilion, they were doing fashion shows. Women's fashion, not a lot else. So somebody came up with the idea, maybe Disney can do something for us. They built this little round building in the back, and they showed Circarama, 360-degree movie, like Circle Vision today, but with less screens. And it became a huge hit. I mean, you can see the lines for this The rest of the Brussels, you hardly ever see a line for anything. There was always a line for Circarama. So Walt, being smart, he said, this has really worked out well. I've got the State Department paid for this movie. I can now come and show the same movie back at Disneyland. So for those of us that worked at Disney, you know that there's something you like to do is when you design a pavilion or attraction, you use something called OPM on your project, other people's money. If you can get somebody else to pay for something and you put it in your park and they pay for it, it was great. So they opened America the Beautiful there at Disneyland. This is the original Tomorrowland with the world clock. Unfortunately, that did not survive the remodeling. 62 came by and they wanted to have a Disney presence at the fair. Walt was up to his eyeballs at this time at Disneyland. He was also working on things like Winter Olympics and that. But he did take advantage of the 62 World's Fair for a few things. Went there with his family. There's Walt and Lillian, Diane and Ron. Everybody can tell Ron and Nolan, the tallest guy in any picture. But he's there. And Albert, if you would unmute yourself, you might fill us in on who the rest of the folks are. Because Albert was the head of publicity, radio, and TV for the World's Fair.
Yeah, the man in the striped tie is Joe Gandy, who is the president of the World's Fair, and that's his wife with him. The other people, I don't know who they are.
Okay. Yeah, they obviously Walt, went up to the fair. He learned a lot at the fair, and they also, thanks Albert, they did a little participation in the fair. One of the things you could do was go to the Bell System exhibit, pick up a phone, and you could talk to your favorite Disney character. So if you dial 1, you get Mickey, 5, you get Goofy, whatever. Now these were just pre-recorded messages. They didn't have the actual voice, people sitting there talking on the other side. But this was a whole big thing for people to, get used to using phones. It's really crazy when you think about it. Back in '62, people didn't make things like long distance calls unless it was, to tell grandma that she was now a grandma. That sort of thing was so expensive. So they came up with the Disney exhibit there. They also came up, Disney's being famous for synergy. In Donald Duck, Walt Disney Comics and Stories, Donald Duck goes and he visits the World's Fair. You can see, a little stylized version of the Space Needle there. And Donald replied, I felt just like this. I mean, Donald goes to the World's Fair. He says, hey, maybe I can get a job. The trouble is he's already wearing a tie, so he didn't have to buy it. But I really empathize with this. At the end of it, he ends up destroying completely the World's Fair and leaving it in ruins. So luckily, I didn't have that same situation. But then we jump forward from 1962. We get into the era of the 1964 World's Fair. A lot of cities rather had been trying to get the World's Fair. Chicago wanted another World's Fair. Detroit wanted a World's Fair. Baltimore, all sorts of places wanted a World's Fair. Finally, Dwight Eisenhower decided that the World's Fair was going to be in New York. He figured it was the best thing for international visitors with a major airport and that. So they were going to do he made the announcement they were going to do it, and then they had to figure out where it was going to be in New York. So they looked for a long time for locations. That one of the things they thought about was putting it on Staten Island, which if you're an ex-New Yorker like me, the only way you could get to Staten Island at that time was by ferry boat. But they were thinking that would be a way to pay for the bridge to the island. But they finally decided they would do it back in Flushing Meadows, the site of the 39 Fair. And one of the big reasons was we showed the picture before of the empty roads and everything. Well, those roads and everything were still there. And now they had the pipes in the ground, the water lines were there, the gas lines were there, the electric lines were there. So a big chance now to come and take advantage of the infrastructure that was already there. Plus, if they made a profit on the 64 fair, which they predicted huge profits, that they'd finally be able to finish the park and get it done. So here's Albert's nemesis, Robert Moses. Robert Moses was known as the master builder. He was the guy behind everything in New York City in terms of public works projects, bridges, highways, tunnels, you name it. He was a real force in nature, and it's really interesting. You have certain people from New York particularly if you're in the Bronx and Robert put a highway right through your neighborhood, you mentioned the word Robert Moses, they foam at the mouth and start chewing the rug. If you lived out on Long Island, as I did after we moved from Brooklyn, you were happy because he built the Southern State Parkway and Jones Beach and a whole bunch of other things. But he was a very interesting man. And when we get to the Q&A section, I think Albert can share some stories. And how do you work for a guy that doesn't know the word no, doesn't know the meaning of a schedule, and doesn't, and Albert, in all the years you knew him, did he ever once smile?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I mean, certainly in all of my personal encounters with him, a smile never crossed his face. The only exception might have been when he was around a big personality or celebrity, you know, he would crack a little bit of a smile. But he was a pretty somber guy.
Yeah, but he did it. You think today, if somebody said, "We want you to build this thing, and you got 5 years to do it, and we're going to tear it all down at the end of it," and you couldn't even get the environmental impact reports done in 5 years, let alone build this thing. So he was irascible, he was irritating, and he was a mountain, and we needed to get his mountain moved. So Walt now hears about this World's Fair and starts thinking about it. So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to read the quote here. There'll be a test at the end. Somebody's making some noise here, so let me see if I can figure out who that is. Cosette, I am going to mute you. Nothing personal, but you can unmute yourself at the Q&A portion of it. So we'll go back here. So the fair came by, and again, they had the reaction. They built something for the Expo 58 and were able to use it. So now here's the thought that he has here. What if I go and build stuff for the 64 World's Fair and I can take it back here? And I love it. It says, you know, these shows can go on for 5 to 10 years at Disneyland. So here we are 56 years later, and Small World is still going, and it'll be going if the park was open today. But, you know, even Walt was a little off in his prediction of how popular some of these shows could be. Excuse me. So they built this model of the World's Fair. You can see they knew that the Unisphere was going to be there, the center on the same point where the Trial and Perisphere was. But the rest of the fair is pretty empty. Moses and Walt got together, and Moses knew that if Walt could build Disneyland and build it in a year, he could build anything in the park. So he basically said, what part of the park would you like? Where would you like to put things? And really gave him some very great leeway in deciding what he could do and how he could do it. So this is what we ended up with, the Disney attractions. Again, we pretty much know most of these by heart, but the Ford Pavilion, State of Illinois, General Electric, and Pepsi. And amazing when you think what they pulled off and getting all these things together, put in a short period of time. So
see the future first.
A little background to feel familiar for the World's Fair.
It will be a vacation, an education, and inspiration. Wonder at the world to come. See colonies on the moon and at the bottom of the sea. Thrill to 4 new spectacles produced by Walt Disney, especially for the fair. It's a small world. Ford's Magic Skyway. Great moments with Mr. Lincoln and General Electric's Carousel of Progress. Here to tell you about it is Walt.
I'm sorry.
Disney. Here, for example, is a scale model of the General Electric Carousel Theater, a theater in which the audience itself moves in their seats around the stage. The actors, well, they're not real people, but they are a talented and interesting cast. We call them audio animatronic figures, and they talk and act like human beings. Work in this new type of animation is going on around the clock to meet the opening date of the fair.
Here, humanity's arts and ideas, products and progress will be gathered in a fantasia of friendship and hope. Take a trip to the moon and beyond as you are propelled from the outer reaches of space back to Earth and into the center of the tiniest atom. Narrated by Rod Serling and presented in stereophonic sound in 70mm Spacerium 360 by Cinerama on our 80-foot domed screen, only at the New York World's Fair.
See you at the fair, and remember,
there's a great big beautiful tomorrow.
Everybody sing along.
The end of every day, there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.
Great. I'm just going to go back to the waiting room, let some folks back into the meeting that got dropped out, and then we continue our show in progress. The folks that weren't aware of it, that was not a vintage commercial from the World's Fair. It was something Disney threw together as a teaser for the Tomorrowland movie and did it as a retro style, but I thought folks might enjoy a look back. So Walt starts working on the shows. He wanted to do something called One Nation Under God. He had been interested in doing this for a long time. Back at the 33 Chicago Fair, they had something called the Hall of Presidents, but it was wax figures. It was basically a figure. Lincoln would stand there. The light would come on. You'd hear a pre-recorded Abraham Lincoln. That light would go out. Another light would come on for somebody else, and they would all keep chatting. So he was interested in doing this show, and he went off to try to sell it. He had originally planned it for Disneyland. For you map geeks, and we have a couple on the call, you could try to let me know which one this is. But if you look on Disneyland, if you're familiar with it today, bottom of the right-hand side of the screen where it says Wonderland Music Store, that's right where Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln is today. There's a wall that goes nowhere where the parades come out. And in this time, it would have gone back into two planned areas for the park, Edison Square and Liberty Street. So this was a planned area they was going to add into the park. And they kept planning it and announcing it was coming, it was coming, it was coming, and it didn't come. So you can see in 1958, we're going to be having International Street. 1950, oh, it's 56, 57 International Street. Nope, no, in 58, we're going to have Liberty Street. Nope, 59, we're going to have Liberty Street. Well, we still don't have Liberty Street. So, but here are some concept drawings for it. You were going to walk in off the main street and have this village. And at the end of it was a cul-de-sac called Liberty Square. For our Disney World friends, this will look familiar now. There was going to be a fake seaport and everything else down there at the end of it. He really tried to sell this concept. He went off and said, okay, I've got all these guys that are exhibiting here at the park, and they're already big guys. Monsanto, you'd love to do this, wouldn't you? You already have the Hall of Chemistry. You already have Monsanto's House of the Future. Why don't you go and do Liberty Street? And Monsanto's reaction was the same he got from others. What's the tie between making chemicals and Liberty Street? You know, there's no logical connection between the two. So he said, okay, I'm going to go and I'm really going to try this. He rented a ballroom in New York, sent these letters out to all sorts of companies and asked them to all come in. We'd like to have this great thing to do, the Hall of Presidents. Come in and meet with us, and you'd really like to go and sponsor this. Well, a lot of companies were interested, and then they saw the price tag on it and said, not so much. So, Walt said, okay, maybe I can get General Motors to do this show. And General Motors had the biggest pavilion at the 39 World's Fair, Futurama. They said, okay, Walt, that's great. They had a nice meeting with him, but we have our own team. We're working our own Futurama too. We really don't want to do a show with you, but you might want to go, as long as you're here in town, you might want to go and talk to the folks at Ford. And Walt's team said, what do you mean? Is, well, Ford had fired, I think it was their 8th design team in a row that had tried to come up with plans for the World's Fair, and they were desperate. They had announced it, they had signed a lease, but now they had nothing to show at the World's Fair. So you can imagine in today's world, General Motors telling, oh, I'd really like to help the guys at Ford. Not going to happen. So Ford had been at the Century of Progress. They had not been at the 33 season, but they went to the 34 season when Henry Ford saw how successful the other pavilions had been. And they had a ride here on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see a bunch of cars driving around. They had simulated highways of the world where you had paved roads, dirt roads, log roads, so you could see how well your Ford would ride on all the various conditions of all the roads. At the 3940 Fair, you would get into a Ford, which had a driver who took you through this simulated highway. Back then, the concept was that you would have roads up in the air and people down below. So this showed how these ramps would get you up to the top there. And also they were air conditioning, which was a great thing to show people that they could buy a car. So Ford really wanted to have something where you could be around in cars. And they said, well, we don't know how you would drive through the Hall of Presidents in cars, but maybe you can come up with something else for us. So Walt said, okay. They came up with the idea now of doing a different presentation where you would drive through the 7 wonders of the world. And I love one memo I came across. It says, whatever we decide those may be. So wherever Ford cars are sold, somebody was going to have a wonder of the world. So the first thought was a wonderful thing to go through the deserts, the swamps, everything where you would go in and enjoy it. And they worked out this massive, massive ride to go do this. It was really a great thing to do. But if you look at here, this is probably one of the things that killed it. When you look at the list of figures, well, in the Everglades, we're going to have 67 audio animatronic figures. The Redwood area, 64. The desert, 79. The Grand Canyon, we're going to need 86. Well, you add all these up and how much it comes out to build it, that was basically the end for the that particular concept. But being versatile, they said, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. We can still do something with a smaller number of figures. And hey, kids love dinosaurs. You know, let's go do something with that. So they came up with the idea of starting back in caveman times, discussing the history of transportation, the invention of the wheel, and you know, take you up to modern times. So they came up with the idea. They said, it'd be great. You'll be in your Ford and you'll be driving along. And just like on a Jurassic Park, bottom right, T-Rex would come up and attack you. So they started putting this together and Ford said, great. Now, what was interesting was they were just about at this point, just about getting the meeting, sorry, the word meeting is popping up as people try to admit. The next time I do this, I think after I start, we're just going to say, sorry. So anyway, they were trying to get this all together, and Henry Ford's grandson said, I'd really like to design a pavilion for the fair. So they ended up with a contest now between Disney and the grandson to see who was going to win, and luckily Disney did. So what they did was they built this little miniature model of the pavilion with little cars, and they could get down at camera angle and figure out exactly what you would see if you were in the car to the sight lines. How tall the mountain should be, how big the pterodactyl should be, how close it could be, how big the brontosauruses were. Was pretty interesting way that they had to do it. Excuse me. So now they had the idea of putting people in cars, but one of the things they didn't want to do was have somebody drive them around for 2 reasons. It was going to be indoors, and gasoline-powered cars and a giant indoor pavilion was, you know, from the exhaust system, a bad point of view. But also different drivers who drive at different times. So they came up with the idea of how much of all the cars were on maybe a conveyor belt, like at the assembly line, or maybe something else. How do we do it? So this next little video we have here shows you how the thing came to be. For the folks at Disney, folks, this is in the back lot area. When I started in 1976, this was a lake that had been used for the Lieutenant Robin Crusoe movie. There's John Hench, famous Disney designer. So they came up with the idea, you step on a moving belt, you get onto the car at a nice, easy speed. If you look at the car, you'll notice there's no rear view mirrors, no side view mirrors, because they didn't want people catching their clothes on it, and they didn't want them blocking the view from the driver's seat. So here's your family going off, and here's how they did it. They took a metal pin, put it on a rail, and the car steers itself by following the track around. There's little rubber wheels that are guiding the car. You can see them spaced out here on the track. And they would drive the cars at whatever speed they wanted to, no motor in the car. You come back, there's the pin that steers it. Isn't that a great system? It's the same thing for how you get on and off the dune buggies and everything else these days. So now they had it. They went off and built another one because they needed to go up and down heights. You can see the wheels here. What they found, though, was that all the cars are not the same. They had big, heavy cars, light cars, and they started crashing into each other. So what they had to do was take out the engines, in some cases the transmissions, for the heavier cars, and the lighter cars actually put some weights in them so they could keep them on at the same speed. Bob Gurr, who came up with the system, said that they had to get the bugs out of it. And one of the ways they had to time it in New York was they bought every baseball bat that they could find at a sporting goods store in New York. And they had people stationed along the track. And as they saw they were going to crash, they would throw a baseball bat under the wheel to stop the car until they could figure out how to space them a little bit better. So it's great when you think about the high-tech stuff that we have today, and they debugged it with baseball bats. So at the studio, they were building dinosaurs left and right. Amazing when you think about everything going on at the studio. They were still doing the anthology show. They were expanding Disneyland, building these dinosaurs. Just crazy times. And they had to get all these guys built here and off to New York. So they finally built the Ford Magic Skyway. The big show building off to the left, the big white part of it, was where all the dinosaurs were. The round part was where you loaded, unloaded, and where they would try to sell you Ford cars. Walt learned an interesting lesson from his visit to Seattle. This is the Ford Pavilion in 1962, the large geodesic dome, and look at that line of people stretched out, all standing in the line. Now, Albert, you were VIP. Could you go around the line?
Sometimes. The Ford exhibit there was not very dramatic, though. It was a spaceship ride, and the spaceship probably held, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 people, and then you'd watch about an 8 or 10 minute film. So that's why the line's backed up so much.
Yeah, it was not the greatest of things, but it sure was popular enough. I mean, look at that line. So Walt realized, okay, we need to find a way to entertain people, and they came up with the International Gardens. One of the things they had a problem with Ford and all these exhibitors was that they were putting so much money into the 64 fair that their international advertising budgets were basically zero. So the guys that say, if you're the Ford guy from Italy, you're going, hey, what's in it for me? Well, what we'll do is Ford said, we'll build these little miniatures. These were done by WED, the Imagineering division. And they were typical scenes that you might see while you were out there visiting the real one. And they would, it's really fun. I don't have it in this presentation, but they actually have the English one. The Beatles are standing on a street corner and posing for pictures with the some idolizing fans there. They also came up with the Auto Parts Harmonic Orchestra. This is a Raleigh Crump special. If you look at these things, each of the instruments is built out of car parts. So if you look, for example, and normally when I do this, I use a laser pointer, but if you look at the metronomes, they're windshield wipers. There's all sorts of other car parts. So it sat there, it played music, everything moved and theoretically in time with the music, but it was another way to entertain people as they were waiting to get onto the cars. Then finally you got on the car. They had these fellows in yellow jackets putting people in there. You can see the metal pin that drives the car around, the wheel that drives it. And you can tell that this is an early picture from the fair because of the license plate. What they found out, again, they learned an awful lot about crowd control and loading and that sort of thing. People would stand there and they'd say, oh, I'm going to wait for the car from North Dakota. I'm going to wait for the one from my home state, Rhode Island. You know, well, no, after a while, they just took the license plates off and you got in the car. Then, of course, everyone wanted to ride the Mustang, and it was, no, you just got in the car because they realized if you just try to stack everybody up and give them any sort of preference, you don't get to go. Car in front, the Mustang has a big metal bumper on it. That's because occasionally they still banged into each other. They had a body shop on works that they would repair these things. They would replace all the parts that people stole off them. Like the Mustangs, they had to get a steady supply of Mustang badges because people would pry them off and take home souvenirs. So they also at times they had to put people guards, Pinkerton guards, out in the tunnels because people thought, hey, it'd be really funny to jump out of my car and run up and ride with my friends in the Mustang, that sort of thing. So again, the things you learn. But you went through the dinosaurs. You got to see them drinking and battling and giving birth. And we see the invention of the wheel. If you had looked at the drawing before, you saw that the woman in the drawing was just as disgusted with her husband as the one is here. They also, now we're going to take you into the future. So here's some concept art of the future. You know, it's going to be wonderful. And anybody that's ever worked in a theme park knows you cannot design the future, because by the time you build it, it's already obsolete. So they also ran out of money. So this was the future in 1964, a bunch of plexiglass shapes with some day-glow paint and lots of things running around on conveyor belts simulating flying cars. So it was a little bit of a letdown, but hey, the riding in the car was great fun. We also, when you came out, you could get a badge. And Albert, you had a great story on why the Ford badges glowed in the dark. I thought you might like to share.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. The big competition at the fair was between Ford Skyway and the General Motors Futurama ride. Well, Futurama, from the 39 fair, they would give you a little pin that said, "I've seen the future." And they did the same thing at the 64 fair. And so Ford wanted to do something to compete with them. So they came up with the idea, well, let's do a pin, but we'll do one from each state so people can get one with their own state. But then they came up with this brilliant idea. Let's make the badges from Ford glow in the dark, because they knew that the General Motors Futurama was a dark ride. And so anybody that had been at the Ford Pavilion first, going on the Futurama, would all be wearing these glow in the dark badges that said Ford inside the General Motors exhibit.
You know, it's real payback for having GM, you know, suggest Disney in the first place. Thank you. So they weren't done yet. They were still trying to figure out, okay, we got Ford. They didn't want to do the Hall of Presidents or anything. But Lincoln had been a big thing at the Century of Progress. Maybe we can get somebody else to still do Mr. Lincoln. So they came up with the idea, and Robert Moses was really instrumental in this. He ended up putting a large amount of the fair's money into the development of the Lincoln figure. When Illinois said, hey, look, we only got a state budget. We can only go so far. We can't compete with the Fords, the GMs, you know, the GEs, that sort of thing. We can only spend so much. Disney said, oh, there's a gap there. And Moses actually stepped in, and it's one of the very rare cases in which the Fair Corporation helped finance a exhibit. So they came up with Mr. Lincoln. Walt with his prize figure. This is kind of interesting to see. Originally, they had thought we'd do all the presidents, and then they said, man, we're going to be lucky if we even get one. So let's take a look at an early Mr. Lincoln from 1961. And just show you how much things changed from the time that they got from the development of this figure to what we ended up seeing in the fair. In this one, unfortunately, the sound is lost, but all Mr. Lincoln does is sit there and chat. He doesn't stand up. He doesn't do anything. They had talked about having tap his fingers on his legs, that sort of thing. But as Bob Gurr said, they were lucky they could get the robot just to talk and the eyes and the ears, the eyes and the mouth to blink. So we'll watch Mr. Lincoln here for a second. But it was interesting because we'll see him in a moment when he does his big, impressive stand up. But they took him to the fair and they installed him, and he was all set to go. And he had a problem that periodically he would start flailing his arms and smashing his chair into kindling. And he's looks like a human being, but he's a very powerful hydraulic robot, and literally was able to smash the chair into pieces. And kind of dangerous to be around. So they started trying to figure out what's causing this. Why is Mr. Lincoln doing what he's doing? Well, they finally realized that when they were firing up another pavilion called the Tower of Light, and the giant light beams came on, that it would go off and send a transient spike through those wires in the ground that had been sitting there since 1939. And it would drive Lincoln into spasms. So they had to put some giant capacitors and filters in the circuit to keep it from happening. So you can imagine, you've built this robot, you've announced it, and periodically he starts destroying everything within arm's length. That's why he didn't open the first couple of days of the fair. Now we switch to 1963. Just in 2 years, this is the difference they made.
Now, the skills of the sculptor and the talents of the artist will let us relive great moments with Mr. Lincoln.
When people saw this in New York, they were convinced it was an actor. Absolutely convinced.
The world has never had a good definition of the word liberty.
I mean, really impressive. You look at that, you know, again, he came out, this was when he moved back to Disneyland years later. Matter of fact, interesting, he moved to Disneyland years later, and they were all set, this is great, you know, they put him into the Disneyland during the time the fair was open. So you actually had a Lincoln on both coasts. And they put him into the World's Fair, to Disneyland rather, and they said, oh, we won't have those problems we had in New York. So Mr. Lincoln promptly started smashing his chair into pieces. And they were, oh, God, you know, what's causing this problem? We don't have the Tower of Light. What is it? And, you know, somebody realized it was approximately every 8 minutes or something he would start smashing his chair into pieces. And they realized, oh, every 8 minutes the monorail went by. So now they had to go and figure out some filters to fix that. So they put him out here in Disneyland. It was a special ticket that you had in your ticket book to go see it. And Mr. Lincoln, the show's been updated and newer figures and some changes of speech, but he's still out there. And then, of course, now they have the whole Hall of Presidents down in Florida, and they finally got, you know, it took a number of years for Walt to get his Hall of Presidents, but he did it. And it almost went full circle. Rare Disney map here. You can see where Space Mountain is here. When the Hall of Presidents had been a success in Florida, there was talk about bringing the Hall of Presidents back, maybe finally building Liberty Square, you know, 20, 30 years after we had first thought about it. And then they finally decided, no, that they were not going to cram this into Disneyland. But there was serious talk about having it out here as well. So Liberty Square never came to California. But could more of California go to the fair? Again, Walt liked the idea of other people's money. He had these sponsors. We had Coke Corner out here. And surely Coke, I mean, they were making a fortune off of Disneyland. They, of course, would want to do an exhibit at the World's Fair, right? So how about the Tiki Birds? The first audio animatronic show like this. We'll go and offer Coke the ability to sponsor the Tiki Birds. So Coke was said, yeah, we're really interested, but you know, the World's Fair has got to be new. We can't have anything that's already been done, and everybody knows you did this out in California, so let's go do this now in New York. Nah, we need something else. So Walt came up with the Legends of the Enchanted Island. It's a giant dinner show. You're sitting down in front of the show. You're going to have the tiki gods sing, simulated volcanoes, lava, sacrifices of the gods, with all sorts of atmospheric smells and sounds and everything. And Coke said, no, we don't think so. It's a lot of money. We don't want to do it. We'll do something else. So what did Coke do? You went on a walkthrough through cities of the world where they sold Coca-Cola. If you were here in Hong Kong, their big thing was they had odorizers. So you could smell the different things. You went to a pine forest and you could smell the pine trees. Unfortunately, I remember this well. You went to Hong Kong, you smelled a fish market. Real attractive way to sell your soda. They also showed how you could cool off your Coke in the jungle streams of the Amazon, which I don't know if those streams were particularly cold. And on the way out, you had a bunch of Coke cans and bottles that were, you know, on display, and you could go off and buy a Coke for 10 cents. I always try to figure out, once the Pepsi exhibit opened, whatever happened to all the Coke guys that had said no. There was also talk about doing a monorail for the park. The Disneyland All monorail had been a big success. Disney did this huge presentation for the fair. The whole plans for this are on my website if anybody is a World's Fair fan or a monorail fan, to go all around the park, to leave it there as a permanent attraction after the park. Unfortunately, it didn't come to be. Had these great concepts, but Greyhound wanted to be the exclusive transportation company of the World's Fair with their buses, their escorters, their trams. So the monorail could not have any more than one stop on it, which is what the AMF monorail did. It went in a circle, you got on, you got off. But it was classified as a ride, not a moving system. This is the monorail that later made an appearance in The Simpsons for fans. Back to Edison Square, we're not done yet. Appreciate you folks sticking with me. We had talked about, again, trying to get some of these things. Edison Square up at the top was going to be an area for GE, if all went well, to help sell electric appliances. So you would walk in, you'd see all these street facades, on the outside. As this picture shows, you'd actually walk into the first building and walk from room to room to room inside these fake buildings, and you'd be going and following electricity over the years and seeing how it improved your life. There was talk about using live actors and actresses. So in the first scene, you'd have the mother here, and she's cooking. The pots are bubbling, and the stove is banging and everything. And, of course, the life back then was tough. But then Edison came by and invented the light bulb, and everything got good. So again, this was a diorama you would walk through, and they realized really quickly people walk at different paces. The people down front would see everything, but the people in the back would be seeing the people in front, not a great thing. So they decided to come up with the Carousel of Progress that we all know and love. Did some sketches now for, doing every 20 years. I particularly love, again, the Disney Synergy. They just happen to be watching the Mickey Mouse Club as they're wearing their Mickey Mouse ears. But we ended up with the father that we know. He starts back in the 1890s or so about how, electricity is just coming to be. We jump up into the roaring 20s. We jump up into the 40s or 50s. And then finally, the world of 1964, the futuristic world of the time we were living in. So now everybody remembers the song, right? I saw Albert singing before. So little clip here that's just kind of fun to listen to the Shermans here and Walt.
Walt was a great optimistic futurist. He began from when he wrote the song for the GE Pavilion, and that encapsulated his philosophy.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow.
We were asked by Walt to lead him and sing this song right after he wrote it to impress the GE people.
Well, it sounds pretty good. In fact, that's just the right spirit.
And he says, and when I tell you to leave, we just sort of trot off and do something.
Now, it's really funny. When it was out here in California, they used the Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. But when the Carousel of Progress moved to Florida, GE decided they wanted something new and exciting. So they came up with a new song, Now Is the Time, the best time of your life. And I was at the dinner with the Shermans one night, and Richard seemed to be in a less than excited mood. And I said, "What's bugging you?" And he said, "Oh, they had just finally, GE had pulled out of Florida. They just put the song, the old song back in there. Because they didn't like the new song. He really wanted to have Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. They put it in there, and one of the first people he ran into was, 'Oh, Mr. Sherman, they've ruined your ride. They took out that great song about, now is the time.' And they put in this horrible thing about the beautiful tomorrow." He was just absolutely, beside himself. So. But after the Carousel of Progress, you went upstairs. This never made it back out here to California, and you would see all the wonderful things that GE did in making appliances, jet engines, and that. And you went to the Disney Skystone Spectacular with this great little gadget here, showed nuclear fusion. And what I love down here is since the World's Fair opened, they've done 60,671 successful attempts. I always wondered what happened to the 780 people that were in the room when the radiation went off unsuccessfully. But it went off with a giant flash, giant bang. To show you how popular the GE was, there's the line at the top in 1964. That was the area for an unbuilt pavilion that the land hadn't been sold. These people were at about an hour and a half to 2 hour wait to get in. And again, if you're from New York in summer, you know how that can be. So in 1965, they built this shaded area in there, and they started, again, learning a lot about queue lines and queue line theories, and also that if you put TVs in there, you could sell the sponsors products and get them to pay for the shade. They sent Grandma from the fair out on a tour. They actually hired some women to take her on airplanes, buckle in her seat, and flew around. You have Casey Stengel from the Mets, and they sent her all around the United States to build up anticipation and excitement for it. Then we get to Small World. And this is a really Crump quote. They're all going crazy. They're working on this thing. And all of a sudden, Walt walks in and says he wants to do a little boat ride. Well, this was an interesting story behind what had happened. Was Walt went to a party and ran into Joan Crawford, and she said, "Gee, Mr. Disney, it's really sorry that you couldn't build that World's Fair pavilion for me." And he said, "What do you mean?" Well, Joan was the widow of the head of Pepsi, and she was a member of the board of directors, and they had fired 3 or 4 of their designers, again, with failed shows that they couldn't come up with. They had already started building a building, so there was concrete being poured, steel being put up, and they had no idea what to put in it. So she had arranged for the Pepsi folks to contact Disney, and they ended up with a guy named Admiral Joe Fowler, who was the head of construction for all this stuff for the fair. They made a pitch to him, "Hey, Admiral Fowler, could Disney please do a show for us?" And he said, "There's just no time," turned him down. Never thought to mention it to Walt. Well, at this party, Joan mentioned it to Walt. The next Monday, Walt called everybody in and made sure that Joe Fowler pointedly knew that the name Walt Disney was on the gate, not Joe Fowler, and he announced they were going to do the show. So if Joan hadn't been a driving force for it, we wouldn't have ended up with one of our favorite shows from the fair. So they had a year to do this. I mean, again, now they've got to work within a building that's already been designed, so they have to fit their sets and their show and everything into this building, and they've got to come up with the show, the music, the costumes, and everything. Mary Blair on the left, a famous Disney color stylist that worked on many, many of the animated features and cartoons, one of Walt's favorite artists. Mark Davis, another one of the 9 Old Men, one of the top flight animators that ever lived, started coming up with the concepts for it. And the idea was to have all the kids of the world playing their national anthem as they went through it. So here's my, again, we got attorneys on the thing. Here's my warning. So anybody doesn't want to hear this, fingers in the ears. This is a reel they did for Pepsi to show Pepsi dealers around the country where their advertising dollars are going. So there's Raleigh and Mary walking through the workshop at Imagineering. This is the Mary Blair doll that Walt was so happy with her work, he honored her with her own doll at the fair. So this was shot both at Imagineering, and we'll be coming up to some scenes of it at the studio in Burbank. They wanted to make sure everything worked. They built it all on stage 4 in Burbank, and you actually see them pushing it through on wheels on a boat. This was so they could film the TV show or Disneyland Goes to the World's Fair, because they needed to have this in the can before the World's Fair was open. So all these people are in Burbank, and they're being awed and awed, and here comes our camera. And you can see a man comes by in a few minutes and gives you an idea of the scale of this. When I worked for Disney, I walked through the attraction one day when the park was closed just to see what it looked like from behind the scenes. And they turned the music on to test it. By the time I got out of that building, I never wanted to hear that song again. So it all works. Let's put them all in a bag. Let's put them all in a box and send them off to New York on Global Van Lines, the official van line of Walt Disneyland. No pressure, don't drop it. And off they went to New York. So now they've got this big, ugly building. They decided they needed to do something to take people's eyes off it's basically a Costco, what they inherited, big steel building. So they came up with the Tower of the Four Winds over there on the right. Raleigh had been a designer making these little solar-powered figures and wind-powered figures and stuff in his hobby. So they came up with the idea of doing this tower of kinetic sculptures all moving and swirling around so that you would take your eyes off the building behind you. Raleigh ended up hating what the end result was. You can see it's very thin and delicate on the left, heavy pipes on the right, because he had not taken into account that it needed to withstand a hurricane in New York, so the engineers beefed it up, and he was very glad it did not come back to California. So Joan got her pavilion. Her kids don't look so happy there. I figured the color picture on the right, she and the pig are in competition for the Hat of the Year award. But, Joan had her flaws, but if she had not been very forceful, dynamic individual, we would not have Small World. So we all thank Joan. The pavilion had an admission fee, it was 90 cents, I think. They depleted the New York area for dimes for giving change. But luckily, Wells Fargo came by every day and picked up all the money that came out of there, which went to UNICEF. This guy on the left here was one of the first cosplayers. Imagine how many times this guy walked around, people thinking he was Walt Disney. So just got a kick. When I first saw it, I thought I had a picture of Walt out in the fair and realized it's just Joe Schmo. But up at the top of the Tower of the Four Winds, you had a VIP lounge for the Pepsi executives. Snow White there married Dick Nunis, who became the head of Disneyland and Disney World. So she had a very successful World's Fair gig. Mickey had to stay up on the air. He didn't get to go down on the ground because when he went down on the ground, unfortunately, a bunch of kids from New York decided to pick him up and throw him into the pool of industry. So it became a trick for whether or not Mickey could get away from them fast enough, where they were usually too fast. So the edict came out, Mickey does not go down there. And again, we did the World's Fair show. Again, it aired in May. And that's why they had filmed the scenes out in Burbank, because they were still building the fair. Fair came to an end. It all got locked up, taken down. You can't go there anymore. The very first day after the fair closed, they were taking the boats, taking them out of there. This is tearing down the Small World Pavilion. That was the Tower of the Four Winds and the VIP lounge. Pretty sad. But again, they moved it to Disneyland. So this little map came up, a little visitor's guide explaining how they built the dinosaurs, ran the steam train through it. And my office at Disneyland was behind, behind the dinosaurs. So at night when it was quiet, I'd be sitting there and, working away, and I could hear the T-Rex, screaming and fighting with the Stegosaurus. GE moved out to Disneyland, was out here for a number of years, and then when Disney World opened, they said, okay, we'd like to move it to Disney World, where it's still there today. Small World, of course, moved out here, sponsored by a whole bunch of different companies over time. I'd like to mention that besides bringing back attractions, Disney brought back some ideas. This is the Bell system. These people, he doesn't look so happy, but she's having a good time. And Mitch, who's on the call with us, actually owns one of these chairs. So Mitch, I was disappointed you weren't sitting in your chair to watch the presentation. I thought that might have been fun for you. So, but if you recognize the Omni mover for the Mighty Microscope, or down below the Spaceship Earth, this ride systems that Disney uses today were influenced greatly by the Bell System Pavilion. They also brought back the idea of building big round balls. You had the Trion and Perisphere at the 39 World's Fair, the Unisphere at the 64 World's Fair, and Spaceship Earth down below. They also learned how not to build a theme park. How many people, just wave and I can see, went to Freedom Land? A few, not many. That's why Freedom Land isn't there anymore. But a couple of the Disneyland designers had left Disney, decided, hey, let's go build a theme park in New York. And gee, it looks a little bit like Disneyland. Horse-drawn carriages, riverboats, skyways, a fortress and everything. Walt learned real quickly the New York weather was not conducive to a year-round park. The New York unions were not conducive to building a park. And that's why Disney World ended up in Florida and not in New York, because Freedomland proved by going bankrupt that it was not a place to be. There was also another World's Fair in 1964 in Switzerland. The New York World's Fair was not an official World's Fair because Robert Moses took every rule that there was for official World's Fairs and broke it. Official World's Fair can only run 6 months. He went 2 years. You can't charge international exhibitors for space. He did. You can't do this. He did that. So he got into a very famous tiff with the Bureau of International Expositions, who said there's going to be a World's Fair, but it's going to be in Switzerland. But Walt came over, spent a day there, going around and observing things. I'm sure he was comparing it to his World's Fair, what he had done. But kind of rare footage that showed up of him enjoying it. and you could go and get your picture taken. He's having a ball, isn't he? So I got a kick out of Walt at the other fair. After that, unfortunately, as we all know, Walt died, and World's Fair started going down a bit in popularity as, jet travel started making it easier to go to the places. And there are still World's Fairs today. The next one is supposed to be Dubai. We'll see what happens with that, with the virus stuff. But for Expo 67 in Montreal, they came out and they brought the Circle Vision out. They made a really great film about Canada in 360 degrees. It's been revamped, and you can see it down in Florida today. They also went and took the Auto Parts Harmonic Orchestra and Texasized it to the Car Parts Band and put it in gaudy colors for Hemisphere 68 in San Antonio. They went back to the drawing board again in '86 with another Circle Vision for Expo 86. And then just one final piece before we set you all free to do your yard work and stuff on Saturday. A number of years ago, I got called by somebody that was making a movie, and it was about the World's Fair, but they wouldn't say where it was, who was making it, what it was doing. And they wanted pictures of the World's Fair. And, but they couldn't tell me who they were. And as a matter of fact, they would come out to my house and pay me in cash. So I couldn't trace it back to the production company. And I felt like a drug dealer. Somebody come out to the house, knock at the door, you got the stuff? Yeah, give me the envelope, they'd leave. Well, they called up one day and said, hey, we really need pictures of this one particular thing. Do you have it? And I said, yeah. I said, matter of fact, I'm going to be at this studio tomorrow. I can drop it off for you when I'm visiting the archives. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to be at the Disney tomorrow about noon. I can come by about 1. And they said, we didn't say we're Disney. And I said, well, your phone number starts with 818-560, and they said, oh my God, because all the Disney numbers did. So you can't tell anybody that we're Disney. So it was fun. I had to be sworn to secrecy. But this was what we ended up with, recreating the World's Fair digitally. Welcome to Vancouver and the magic of green screen. I helped secure these Greyhound escorters. We had 3 of them running around, 2 that worked better than the other. It's a dream come true for you and me, so there's a great big beautiful tomorrow. Just a dream away. So I enjoyed the World's Fair piece of it. The rest of the movie, not as much. Anyway, that's my presentation. We'll get to the Q&A part in a moment. Hope folks enjoyed it. I'd invite you to go to my website, worldsfairphotos.com. If you go to the /Zoom, excuse me, there's a little area in there for information, upcoming talks, a free gift that you can get for listening to me blather away for a while. And then you can go and every pavilion from the 64 World's Fair is on my site. Movies, you can download the fireworks for the music for the fireworks show, all sorts of things like that. So appreciate folks coming. Let me stop the share here, and I will unmute everybody.
Oh, no, don't do
Yay.
that.
People are still there. Oh my goodness.
Very good.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Look what I have on my background.
What buildings are still left today, if any?
There's not many. The New York City Pavilion is still there. It's used now as the Queens Museum. That had been built for the 39 World Fair. The 64 World Fair Pavilion is still there. The Post Office Pavilion, which is now a warehouse stuck in the back, is still there. And I'm sure the entranceway is still there. What else would I be forgetting?
Hall of Science.
What's that? Oh, the Hall of Science, right? Yeah. I'm looking right at a map here on the wall. I should remember. The Hall of Science is
Paris
still
on the
there.
Park.
Unisphere is still there.
Oh, of course, the Unisphere, yeah.
Unisphere, Terrace on the Park.
The boathouse. Renovating the State Pavilion.
39.
39.
And there's the monument to the Vatican Pavilion.
So I took them off my order because now I want you to see that we are not out of here.
Okay, we're gonna mute.
We worked for,
Yeah, there's a few things there. One of the things I suggest, if you do get a chance to go back to New York, you can go to my site and download a map of the fairgrounds and walk around and figure out what's there. I'm talking to somebody about potentially doing an app where you can walk around on your phone and through GPS figure out where you were and show you, click between 39 and 40. So we've been discussing that and just trying to figure out how we get that done and how we fund it. So what other questions do we have?
Yeah, Bill, can you hear me? This is Mike.
Yes.
Sorry, my camera crapped out. But anyway, I wanted to ask you if you had gone, when you were a young man and at the fair, did you go on It's a Small World?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I try to do everything at least once. And again, budget was the issue, you know, that the World's Fair was $1 for a kid to go to, and Small World was 90 cents. I think for a kid it might have been 75. But I went on it with my parents,
all ready to go.
my brothers, and
I may take that approach with my Dodger ones.
Somebody's talking in here. I have a little trouble hearing you.
Gary Stern is telling us about the Dodgers. So, yes, no, I did go on Small World. It was interesting. I mentioned the other day, I think I only went to the World's Fair once with my whole family. I had 4 younger brothers, and my dad said, I'll meet you after work one day. So my mom took us all in by train, and it was like, where do you meet at the World's Fair? Oh, we'll meet you at the Unisphere. So we went to the Unisphere, and we didn't see Dad, so we decided to walk around the Unisphere and find Dad. And about 2-3 trips around the Unisphere, no Dad. So I said to my mother, I said, look, you know, we're going clockwise around the Unisphere like most people are. Why don't I go counterclockwise and see if maybe Dad's following us around? And she was kind of like horrified that, you know, she might lose me, which it was nice that she didn't want to lose me. But I said, Mom, if I'm going counterclockwise and you're going clockwise, sooner or later we're going to meet. So I went the other way. I met my father, who was in not a great mood. He was still in his suit from New York, his hat and everything, looked like he was a madman. And we met up again. And after that, my father decided I could go to the World's Fair as often as I wanted, as long as he didn't have to go and I could find a way to pay for it. So I went a lot. I had a friend whose sister worked at the Bell System, and she would get us into the fair a lot. And then I would be able to use my money for things like Small World. But yeah, it was again, I was very lucky. I lived in the right spot, right time, right place, with great ability to do it. Hey, Debbie, you're at surrounded by a few stormtroopers, I see, huh?
Just a few, Bill. Hey, question. Why didn't you talk about the Marvel work that you did after you talked about the Tomorrowland movie?
Oh, yeah, I should have put that in there. How many people saw Iron Man? I guess it was Iron Man 2.
Yeah,
yeah, he goes back to Bill Stark Expo. That was another fun one. I got a call from folks. That was before Disney owned Marvel, and they said, "Hey, we're going to create the 64 World's Fair, and could you help us with that?" So I did, and one of the things they wanted to do was take all of the corporate logos out of the 64 World's Fair so that they could sell them to modern people. So instead of having the GE Carousel of Progress, you have the Nike Carousel of Progress. Then they decided that some other things look better for different sight lines, so we would take this pavilion and move it over here. Then they finally decided that Mike Fonseca, you're being noisy.
No, maybe everybody should mute themselves, and then when they
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll mute everybody here, mute all.
Yeah, that's Kevin.
And then when you want to ask a question, you just go down and you can unmute yourself. The one part that was really funny was they said, what does a World's Fair designer's office look like? And I said, what do you mean? It's, well, we're going to show his dad designing it. So what would it look like? So I had to go back and figure out, okay, you know, for the days back at Wetter Imagineering, we'd have models, we'd have color swatches of fabric, we'd have this and that. So we kept putting together an office, and they'd say, how about this? And I said, not messy enough. And they go, how about this? How about that? And, no, you need more stuff. So we ended up just putting stuff in there. And I remember one of the guys said to me, you actually work in those conditions? Well, I went back to his office. He was a set designer, and his office looked just like it. I said, you didn't need me. You could have used your own damn office. It was really funny. But they had to have a theme park office, not a movie designer office. Other questions, just feel free to unmute yourself. It's on the bottom left of the screen. Yes.
Bill, it's Albert Fisher here. Just wanted to let everyone know that the Expo 2020 in Dubai has officially been changed to Expo 2021.
Oh,
It's
okay.
been canceled this year, and it'll happen next year instead.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know they were going to keep the name and just change the year, but they're changing it. Think of all the merchandise they're going to have to be putting stickers over now.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
Question. There are a couple of pavilions, the IBM Egg, the Tower of Light, and the US Pavilion. I've been able to find audio on them, and we had a brief conversation about that over at the Disney History Institute. But I was wondering, is there any way you can find video of these old attractions? There's nothing on the Egg, for example.
Well, back in '64, interior lighting and video, well, there was certainly no video back then. Film was the big issue. Even still pictures are tough to find because it needed so much light. So I do have some pictures, for example, in IBM. You can see some pictures on my site of the inside of what it looked like. Tower of Light, I have some pictures of the stage show. I have got a lot of footage which I've got to digitize, and I don't think I have much in the way of interiors because it was so light sensitive back at that time, or insensitive, that it's just very hard to find. One thing you can find online, though, is the film "To Be Alive" from the Johnson Wax Pavilion. That was a multi-screen film, so you can only find pieces of it. But you can go and recreate that. And if you go to the Johnson Wax Pavilion or the headquarters in Wisconsin, they still show the film 1 day a week. So it's still showing. But interior stuff is very, very hard to find of basically anything because it was so dark.
Okay.
Bill?
Yes.
Yeah, I have 8mm film that I had digitized and the whole thing that actually I gave. That has a lot of inside stuff. I have basically the whole Small World, and I had was that the DuPont show?
Yeah,
and a lot of other things. I can get in touch with you. I have it on. I guess it's on not on disc, but I have it on DVD.
Oh, that'd be great.
And I can send it to you. And if you want to use it and share it, that's just like I did with Matt. Actually, Matt was the one who had the film converted to digital and HD.
Oh, super. I'd love to see it.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll get in touch with you later. I gotta find it and I'll send you. I think I probably have to send you a link to it because I can't send. It's too long. It's like there's maybe about 2.5 hours worth of film.
Oh wow, that will keep me busy.
So I'll get in touch with you and I'll figure a way of getting it to you.
Great.
Oh yeah.
I decided because the day is worn on. Now I'm going to go to the fireworks show.
Hey, Bill, it's Mike Clark back here again as a still picture. I was wondering if Al Fisher could answer a question.
Yeah, I'm here.
Al, you were an adult there. A lot of us were children who were fortunate to live in the New York area like Bill. So as an adult, what was your favorite attraction at the '64 World's Fair?
Well, I probably went through every single exhibit at the fair multiple times as head of TV and movies for the fair. So it would vary from week to week and month to month, but overall, I guess probably the General Motors Futurama was one. By and far, the Johnson's Wax To Be Alive film. I probably saw that a few hundred times. I mean, I know it by heart now. IBM was really creative and unique, and the four Disney things were wonderful too. It's like comparing apples and oranges, really, with the different exhibits.
Thank you.
Right. Hey, Kenneth, I'm looking behind you. There's one of Rob Bianco's amazing models. For folks that don't know it, Rob Bianco is probably the master model maker that I've ever met. And you can see a bit of the Ford pavilion behind Kenneth. I've got his New York State pavilion. And someday we ought to get you to show that video, Rob, of you creating the entire World's Fair for somebody who's got more money and space than I do. But Rob does custom-made models, so if you have a particular pavilion, or if you'd like him to build you the whole fair again, I'm sure he'd just nothing else to do.
And they are absolutely gorgeous down to the smallest detail. So highly recommend if you get a chance to get one from him.
Oh yeah, there Mitch is showing his New York State Pavilion in the window there if you have Mitch up on your screen. So yeah, it's like, you know, it's collect the whole set.
Hey, Mitch, say something so we can find your screen.
He's got himself muted.
I'm here. Yeah, wait. Yep, I was muted, but
Yeah, just for anybody who doesn't know this, there's a tab at the right-hand part of your screen where you can, because we're on 3 separate screens now because of the number of people, so you can click that blue arrow and go to the right if you don't see who you want to see.
Super.
Great, thanks.
Anything else?
Hey, Bill, I have one more question.
Sure.
I noticed on one of the overheads or the aerial that there seemed to be a major thoroughfare running through the grounds. How did people navigate through that? Was there an under walkway or a?
There were actually a couple roads that went through. You had Grand Central Parkway goes between what was called the transportation area in the main fair. Then you had the Royal Island Expressway, is it, that runs past the
Yes.
the lake amusement area. So there were bridges. There were originally bridges because there were roads there back in the days of the 39 fair, but they expanded them and made them wider bridges for the other fair. One of the things when I post pictures online, saying, oh, here's a picture of the transportation area from the bridge or something. The number of people, oh my God, I've never seen that road with no cars on it, you know, particularly in the daytime. So many people, you know, I'm posting a picture because I'm getting a kick out of, oh, this is a great view of the Ford Pavilion. And people, my God, look at that 61 Duesenberg or, you know, whatever, you know, they're looking at the cars, they're looking at the highway. So that's part of the fun I get is that, you know, I see one thing I posted out there in the conversations can go into all over the place with people, other pieces of it. But yeah, the highways are you know, run through it and they're still there. Matter of fact, in one of my books on the 39 fair, I show what the Grand Central Parkway looked like when they were starting to build the fair. And it was like a country road. And, you know, you look at it, you know, today and you can't even imagine that that's the way it once was.
Bill?
Thank you.
Yeah, Scott, are you saying something?
Yeah. Point of fact about Robert Moses. All the building he did, he never had a driver's license.
Yeah.
He had a chauffeur who drove him around. And even to this day, if you mention his name in the Bronx, duck.
Yeah, I mentioned that at the beginning, that he was not a popular guy, particularly in the Bronx. Like I said, on Long Island, we loved him, you know.
Yeah.
Gave us Jones Beach, you know.
Bill, I had a
He was
question.
Jones Beach, but he also caused problems.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about the Carousel of Progress. So you said it moved. I've seen it at Disney World, the actual show, but I think there's still something at Disneyland that retained the circular structure. Is that right?
Yeah, what they did was when they built, they moved it out here and we had the Carousel of Progress. We didn't have the whole Sky Dome Spectacular upstairs, but they took it and they moved it to Florida and they put a show in called America Sings. And it was a wonderful show about the same sort of thing, how music has changed over the years. For whatever butthead reason that Disney decides to do these things, they decided to take out America Sings, repurpose some of the figures into the Splash Mountain. And it sat there for years with a sign up in front about coming soon, Imagineering a new attraction for your future delight. Well, then they finally stuck something in there, Imagineering Pavilion or whatever, and it was just terrible. You could go in there, and there was a guy demonstrating this amazing new device called TiVo. Oh, wow, that's really great. And oh, here's Texas Instruments has something else. So it's still there today, and you can go in and meet Star Wars meet and greets and that. But how many people went and saw America Sings? Yeah, great show. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and it's gone. So the building's still there. I don't know. I wish Disney, you know, Debbie's retired. She, you know, you still have clout. Go make them do something good with it.
We'll tell Steve to do it. He's sitting here with me.
Oh, okay, yeah, get him to do it, So yeah, like I said, America Sings was there, and I forget what year that left, somewhere in the 80s, I think, 90s. But it's really disappointing that you have so much potential and it's just absolutely wasted there in time. That was also, unfortunately, one of the things Disney learned the hard way was that when they built the carousel out here, it became the case of one of the first deaths at Disneyland. So that's what I would do, a panel on all the deaths at Disneyland. I used to share an office with the attorney that had to defend all those. So, but yeah, they had the carousel would go around, and you have a moving wall and a solid wall, and would come together. You do the show, and then it would move on. Well, they went in the opposite direction when they moved it out to California for some reason, and a brand new employee was leaning around the thing to her friend in the next room. Hey, thanks for getting me the job. And the moving wall and the non-moving wall met with her in the middle. So she unfortunately got killed, and now there's a breakaway. They actually ended up putting sensors in the seat that if she got out of the seat to go wave, it would stop the ride. But they had to put breakaway panels because they found out the hard way. So that was a sad thing about America Sings. But other than that, great attraction. It didn't kill you.
Bill, I have a question.
Yes, Mike.
You said they moved Lincoln to Disneyland in 1965, so it was there and at the New York World's Fair.
Yes.
Well, you had mentioned that Disney loved other people paying the money for all this stuff. So why didn't Walt just wait to move the one from New York to California?
Excellent question, because he come up with a better Lincoln and convinced Illinois and the New York World's Fair to pay for the better Lincoln to make the show even better for 65. So he took the used Lincoln and was able to move and swap them around.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bill?
Yeah.
Two questions. The parachute ride that you showed, is that the one from Coney Island?
Yes. It was at the 39 World's Fair. It was actually interesting. They had it at the 39 season, and then they decided that they needed the space for it for a big stage show. So they took the whole thing down, moved it to another part of the fair, and put it back up again. And then it was moved to Coney Island, where it operated for years as a working attraction. And I went there and got to see it back in the steeplechase days. And then unfortunately, it's been, it was really in bad shape. And then they came, repainted it, fixed some of the metal, and now they have all the lights on it. It doesn't operate as a ride anymore, but it's the same structure from the.
It hasn't operated in years. There's been other problems with it from all the sea air corrosion.
Yeah.
Another question: is there any video of Abraham Lincoln smashing his chair?
Not that I know of. It's actually interesting. Trying to find even pictures of Lincoln. Glad you mentioned it. Even I go and I mentioned I have 25,000 pictures. I have about 4 pictures of Lincoln, and maybe one's okay, because back in those days, nobody had video cameras and nobody had cell phones, but people actually listened to things. So they would say at the beginning of the show, no flash photography, and people would listen. Today, of course, everybody'd be taking the pictures and doing everything you want, but it's very hard to get good interior pictures of these things, because even if you had a flash, and I would always get a kick when you see people at a concert or something, they're taking pictures of their flashes. The flash goes 10 to 12 feet, and the stage is 350 feet or something away. So pictures of Lincoln are hard to get. And one of the things that's actually interesting, and the reason Disney came to me for help on doing their Tomorrowland movie, was that they have next to nothing in the Disney archives on the fair itself, because it was financed by the studio, it was designed and built by Imagineering, and it was operated by Disneyland. And each one of those divisions figured the other guy was keeping stuff. So over the years, I need some space, I'll throw this junk out. I need to get rid of some stuff, I'll get rid of this. So when I hired on at Disney, it was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be able to get access to all this great World's Fair stuff. And I went out there and they brought out this manila folder and said, that's all we've got. I said, what do you mean? Everything, nothing. So Dave Smith, the archivist at the start of the archives, he and I would go to sales and stuff and try to, buy some other stuff for him. And then Becky, the current head of the archives, occasionally ends up with some stuff. But we basically have a mutual aid society. I find something, I scan it, I give it to them, they find it, they give it to me. They're very nice and very helpful with that. But, you know, they had nothing. So, like I said, you know, you just think you'd go to Disney because they document everything so extensively. But the World's Fair just kind of fell into the multi-divisional hole in the wall. It's interesting because people's pictures keep moving around. So somebody who was here is now over there. It's sort of like watching a video game.
Hey,
Anyone
Bill?
else?
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah.
The 1958 Brussels. I had heard or read that Disney went, was very impressed, and out of that came the Fred McMurray absent-minded professor of Flubber character.
You went to which show?
The 58 Brussels, and there was a comical science character that he based his Fred McMurray absent-minded professor.
Could be. I don't know anything about that in particular. It was interesting because, as I mentioned, they came up with built all the building because they were trying to outbuild the USSR. So they spent all the money in architecture, and then they had this big concept they were going to do a Hollywood thing inside, and that fell through. So I have very little information on what was actually inside the pavilions. You know what they did.
I believe I read that in e-ticket somewhere.
Could be. Yeah. I just don't happen to know that off the top of my head.
Right, right.
Bill, can I ask a question?
Yes, as long as it's not about the Dodgers.
No. I have nothing to talk about with them. Can you talk a little about the from fair to fair, the financing and how the structure's put together? In other words, I understand the idea of OPM, but is it completely NGO, or do governments get involved in the book and provide seed money for infrastructure design, overall design of where things are going to be? Is there a board that carries over from one fair to the other? How does that work that brings it to fruition?
Okay, let's see. We got about an hour. No, basically the way it works is that most World's Fairs get started by a bunch of businessmen deciding that this is a great way to make money, irregardless of the fact that almost every World's Fair ends up losing money. But you can make money in direct ways, or you can make money in indirect ways. So let's take Seattle as an example. Seattle was sitting there, a fairly nice sized city, but they were having a lot of competition now because they had been a big seaport, and everybody was bringing things in and out of Seattle by ship. And now jet planes started coming along. And what are we going to do to position ourselves as a major international headquarters? Let's have a World's Fair. So they formed a committee, a nonprofit corporation, to build a World's Fair. And now you have to go off and you have to get permission from the Bureau of International Expositions, which licenses or sanctions World's Fairs, to do it. And as I mentioned earlier, they have all sorts of rules on how big it can be, how much you can do, and whatever. But now you've got to get the money to go off and do it. So a city like Seattle would say, okay, there's something in it for the city itself. The city government wants a new opera hall. So we'll build the money to build a hall here at the pavilion of the fair, so that pavilion will be an opera hall after the World's Fair. We want something else to be done. But you take things like the Space Needle was built by a private consortium because they were trying to figure out a theme structure for the World's Fair. The people that built the Space Needle designed and built it, and they still own and operate it today. So you have a whole combination of ones. In 1933, they started building, doing the World's Fair, and then the Depression comes along, and now it was great that they could buy material and get labor real cheap, but did they have the money to build the fair? So they actually went off and they sold people pre-sale tickets that, for the community. Hey, if you give us the money, this ticket may be worth a visit to the World's Fair if we ever built it. And they had a tremendous grassroots effort of the local community throwing money in to buy tickets and finance this. In general, you'll find the best way to lose money is to invest in a World's Fair. They just don't make money. Almost every World's Fair overestimates the size of the attendance, underestimates the size and the complexity of doing it. But when you do something like the New York World's Fair, it costs a bunch of money. They lost a bunch of money on it. But the highways got built as a result. The Verrazano Narrows Bridge got built. And then, you know, the fair itself didn't make a lot of money, but how much money did all the small businesses make in terms of their hotels, their restaurants, their taxi car companies, you know, everything else going on. So today, World's Fairs tend to be financed more by the governments and big corporations. So like China had a World's Fair that had lots of people going to, because the Chinese would actually go to a village and order everybody, you're going to the World's Fair tomorrow, because they wanted to be able to say, we had the biggest attendance ever. Well, if you got guys pushing on the buses or else, you'll get a big attendance. So World's Fairs are still done, but they've become much more of a corporate showcase than a national showcase, just because the money involved. Like when I went to, I've been lucky, I went to a couple of them as I traveled the world for Warner Brothers, and like Scuba Expo 85, you know, the US Pavilion was really sad. It was all about how Texas Instruments had put a thing about calculators and stuff. And you'd go to the Canadian Pavilion, it would be what made Canada a great nation. And you'd go to, you know, Czechoslovakia, and here's what you can see if you visit Czechoslovakia. And you went to the US, hi, I'm the guy from Coke, and I'm Texas Instruments. So some of the luster came off them with some of that. But they still have them. Oh, Carol's back. She's got a snack. Now I'm getting hungry.
Bill, thank you for hosting this. You definitely did a great thing.
Yes, thank you.
This was amazing.
Love it. Outstanding.
Yeah, this
Give
was
you a
great.
round of applause.
Yay!
Thank you. If folks are gluttons for punishment, next Saturday, Albert and I are going to be doing one same time, same bat time, same bat channel, actually a different invite. But Albert put together a presentation a while ago that he was trying to convince PBS that they'd love to do a thing about the two different New York World's Fairs. And they didn't go for it, but we generated a lot of material for it. So next Saturday, same time, we're going to be talking both more in-depth look at the 39 and the 64 World's Fairs. And then 2 weeks for them today, we're going to be taking a visit to the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, where again, he will, at the same time, 10 o'clock, and Albert will tell you what it's like to go on a double date with Elvis Presley and still have your date try to notice that you're there too.
10 o'clock New York time, 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock Pacific time, yeah.
All right, 1 o'clock.
Where will the invite be?
Yeah, I'll put out the invite on it, and if you can go to worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom. I've got the information on there, and early that morning, about a half hour, 15 minutes or so before the talk, I'll put out the invite. I can't put it out early because there's these morons that go and look for Zoom meetings, find it, and then jump in and try to, you know, take them over. So I figure if they find it 15 minutes before, they've got to be pretty active. If I give them a couple days, it's more chance for them to do it. But for the next foreseeable Saturday, every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, I'll be doing something about one of the World's Fairs, or maybe Zorro, or, you know, maybe I'll show, you know, home movies and, you know, show my kids at Disneyland or something. We'll find something to do.
And you have books, right, Bill? You wrote a book.
I've written a few. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us how to get those.
If you, thank you. Oh, that's right. Oh, you 10 bucks. You're supposed to ask that. No, I've written 12 books on World's Fairs so far. I'm actually working on number 13. But if you go to my site, worldsfairphotos.com, you can go and visit each of the fairs that I've done something about. So you can go and take a virtual tour of the 62 World's Fair, or the 86 World's Fair, or the 85 World's Fair. And on there are links to buy the book. And I even put a button on the Zoom page to get a free gift for all you people that have been putting up with listening to me and staring at me. If you go to worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom, you can click on put my free gift in my basket, and then go buy something else, and I will send you your free gift. And awesome. It is not worth the price of admission, but it is free.
Bill, two quick questions.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for producing the calendars, and also your wonderful books, collaborating with Bill Young.
Yeah, I was hoping Bill was going to join us today. He had sent a note about hoping to do it. What had happened was Bill Young put together a great website, nywf64.com. And he had not been to the World's Fair, but he fell in love with it from afar. And in 2001, he put together a great thing that we did called Saturday in the Park. And he and I got to meet each other. and had a great time. And then somebody had announced, the publisher that I do most of my stuff with these days, Arcadia, had announced they were going to do a book on the 39 and the 64 World's Fair. And the guy turned in the book on the 64 World's Fair, and they said it was absolutely unpublishable. They couldn't do it, but it's already on their calendar. So on a frantic thing, they found Bill's website and said, would you like to write a book on the World's Fair? And Bill said, yeah, but I don't have any pictures, but I know this guy that might. So Bill and I got in touch, and we did our first book together in the days before all the teleconferencing and everything else. I'd write a chapter, he'd write a chapter. We'd send it back and forth, homogenize it. And Mike Clark and I used to do the same thing with articles for Starlog magazine. But Bill Young and I put this the book together, turned it in, and it became Arcadia's. I'm gonna pat myself on the back here. Became Arcadia's #1 bestseller, because they generally do books of things around, like your hometown, Flushing, New York, or your hometown, Mineola, New York. Well, this one was people all around the country and the world bought it. So we did the first book, and then one day Bill said, I wonder if they'd be interested in the second one. I said, wow, probably not. Send them a letter. They said, oh yeah. So the second book was on how the fair was built, things that didn't come to be, where pieces of the World's Fair are. Like I've got a major piece of the World's Fair that is in my town where I live now that I didn't know it. And one day these people called up and said, hey, do you happen to have a picture of this last window? Yeah, where's your church? You're in Granada Hills? I'll be there in 6 minutes. It was bizarre. Then Arcadia asked, would you like to do our first color book? Would you like to do our first foreign language book? So yeah, I've got 12 out now, and I'm currently doing a book on the 1939-40 San Francisco World's Fair. So it's great fun. I don't make a fortune on it, but I hated having all these pictures just stored on the computer or in closets. I love being able to share them with people. And one of the things I really like is when you put them on online on Facebook or something, or other sites, and people start bringing back their own memories. I really like to use it to prime the memory pump. But yeah, the books have been fun. I've enjoyed doing them, and it's better than sitting around watching TV. And again, you can get them all on my website. I'll be happy to sell them, or they're on Amazon, or if you have a bookstore in your town, they can order them, that sort of thing. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, do you have a quick second for 2 quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I should mention, when I was about 12, you were kind enough to send me an autographed copy of one of your books, which is probably what got me started on the 64 World's Fair. I was always interested in the 39 World's Fair. I come from where they built Electro and where he is now. But the first question I had, kind of off Electro, it seems like Westinghouse's role was significantly diminished from 1939 to 1964. If you look at the pavilions, where in 64 it's reduced to 3 saucers and a time capsule. Do you have any idea of why they opted for such a smaller exhibition, what their role was in the industrial zone, that kind of thing?
Yeah, unfortunately, if you look at the history of some of the companies, the giant industrial companies of 39, some of them were not in as strong a spot as 64, and a lot of them have gone. No Westinghouse today, or they're just a brand name, but no real company. So that became the big issue. Westinghouse had kind of screwed themselves over in one way. They had the time capsule they buried from 39, and now they had to be back in that same spot for 64 because they wanted to do something in there. So they were kind of limited by the amount of space that they had available, and they couldn't build a grand pavilion because other people had already leased room around them on other areas. So they had talked about trying to do things, but one of the problems people find, and one of the reasons you don't have a lot of modern stuff at World's Fairs today, is that by the time you design it and build it, your competitors have already pretty much done the same thing. So that's why you went to super futuristic stuff with GM, about colonies on the moon, or cutting highways through the Amazon. You didn't see too much about what the 1969 GMs would be. And Westinghouse at that time was starting to go into a slow downward spiral in terms of innovation and growth, and they just didn't have the money to come up with something that was going to be on the same class. I mean, I have some pictures from the 39 World's Fair of the interior of that pavilion. It's just astonishing. Excuse me, not the coronavirus, you're all safe. But I mean, the stuff they had inside was just gorgeous, and they spent a fortune on it. And they did a major remodel between 39 and 40 seasons to make it even better. And unfortunately, in 64, they just weren't there. I've actually thought about doing a chart. I'm looking at my map of the World's Fair, and you think about how many companies have gone out of business since then, or only exist in brand names. It's kind of sad.
To this day, Westinghouse's big appliance factory is rusting away on the other side of my town. The other question I had, although I will say they, just as an aside on Westinghouse and their involvement in the fair, Electro, they have the original robot, which has been adjusted for its film roles in the 50s, and then they have the cast that they made that they intended to make a working replica out of it. And that's fallen by the wayside, but for a few weeks last year, they connected his neck up to power, and if you asked them very nicely, they would very carefully turn it on, and he'd kind of swivel side to side, and it's an oddly exciting thing to see. The other question I had, which is kind of much more mundane and a lot quicker, I remember reading on the World's Fair forums of a person or a team that was developing a 3D walk-around of the New York World's Fair, the 64 fair. Do you know what year that, by any chance?
Yeah, it was Dr. Laurie Walters, University of Central Florida, and she was given the task of coming up with teaching 3D modeling to her students. And she thought, rather than just modeling a generic building, a generic city, a generic street, why don't we go and have some fun with seeing if we could recreate the World's Fair? So I worked with her to come up with it. And I've been trying to reach Dr. Walters. She's moved into a kind of another area. And I have a copy of the program, but it doesn't run for some reason today. Their server's down. It was a really great thing. It was basically Chrono Leap was the idea. And you're at the Queens Museum of today. Something has gone wrong. The space-time continuum is collapsing, and you got to jump back into time to go fix things. And you would go back, and people back there, you could interact with avatars, and they would tell you, oh, you need to go to this pavilion, you need to go to that pavilion. And it's fantastic stuff. I mean, and one of the things I really got a kick out of is they would take some of my still photos of, say, a view from the New York State Pavilion of the highway. And it's a still picture, but as you're watching it, the cars are driving, because they would take the car, you know, clone it, move it, clone it, move it, clone it, and they put the whole thing together. So the cars are actually going up and down the highways. They'd have a still picture of the New York State Pavilion, but the elevator is going up and down. They did some amazing work. So I was just in touch with somebody the last 2 days from University of Central Florida, and I got to try to get back in touch with Dr. Walters. She just did amazing work on it, and I'd love to see if there's a way she can bring that back to life. It was a very immersive experience.
I do a little digital modeling with virtual reality, and I'd love to take a pair of virtual reality headsets and walk around the fair at some point.
Get in touch with me after this. We'll see if we can find some way to put you, me, Dr. Walters, and some other people that are talking about it. Maybe we can come up with a little task team and just do a little piece of it or something. She was great. She was doing the whole thing. It was an astonishing program. I mean, it took a lot of space, but hey, space is cheap.
I used that software about 2 or 3 years ago. I have an email link somewhere to where I was able to get it down. I'll see if I can find it and put it up in the comments in a moment.
That'd be great. Yeah, I've got it sitting here on my computer, and the last time I tried to run it, there was some incompatibility, so I got to get back to it. The trouble is, it's very addictive, because what happens is you go back, and if you don't complete your mission in a period of time, it throws you back to today, and then you have to go back to the fair. But it was a great experiment, great way to do it.
Sure. Thanks.
Sure, no problem. That's it. Everybody's done. Great. Lunchtime.
I have one more quick question.
Sure.
Getting back to films, were there any professional films ever made recording, let's say the Carousel, the Carousel program, the Ford and GM rides, professionally?
Yeah, there are some professional films that go out. There's a really good one for General Motors, and you can find it on YouTube. Where this woman's in her kitchen dreaming about the world of the future, and the next thing you know, she's riding through the Futurama pavilion, and she's looking very thoughtful and very, very enthralled by everything around. So there's that one. There's another one Sinclair did for Sinclair dealers, and you can go and see the Sinclair dinosaurs, the gas station of the future, that sort of thing. There's also a number of newsreels that were shot. So you can go on, like British Pathé Films did it, and you can search for that, and you can see people in what you call it, outrigger canoes out in Meadow Lake and other odds and ends. So most of the companies did something. The trouble is trying to find some of them. Like, you know, Kodak, for example, I thought it'd be interesting to do something on all the giant pictures that were on the side of the Kodak pavilion. So I wrote to Kodak before they imploded totally, and they said, oh no, we don't have any records from the fair. Try the George Eastman House. No, we don't have it from the fair. So a lot of the companies just did not save their stuff from the fair, or I'd get in touch with them. And I said, oh yeah, we used to have that, and we got rid of it about somewhere in the 70s. And of course, I'm looking for it in the 90s. So because it was interesting. This one woman wrote to me. Do people remember the big pictures on the Kodak Pavilion? They were done to look like giant slides. And this one woman wrote to me, and she said, you know, I was a model taken. I was like, I think she said she was 10 years old, 12 years old, and she was with two other people, not her parents, but they were doing a skip rope. And she was skipping rope, and there's a picture of her on the pavilion. Did I happen to have a copy of it? And I said, do you happen to know what month it was on? Because, you know, 25,000 pictures, it takes a while to look through them. No, I don't remember. So I looked, and I found every picture, and there's a picture of the girl skipping rope. So I sent it to her, and she was thrilled. And she said, oh, I just wish I was wearing a purple dress, because she has a business now where she sells purple everything, purple dresses, hats, for whatever reason. She's under the color purple. And she goes, oh, I just wish I'd been wearing a purple dress when they took that picture. So 15 minutes later, she got her picture, and she's wearing a purple dress. The things you can do with Photoshop. But yeah, so many of the companies just don't have anything on the fair. I've tried going to General Motors. They have very few. Matter of fact, sometimes they've misidentified. If you go to their website, they have some stuff about the fair, and I have to keep pointing out to them, no, that was not this fair, it was that fair. A lot of companies just don't have anything about it. Then there were some people, like the New York Port Authority had a movie about New York State, a travel film. Unfortunately, every known copy that was stored in their vaults in the Twin Tower in New York. So when the Twin Towers came down, they lost everything they had on the fair. So I actually did something for the Port Authority where I came back to New York and met with the Port Authority employees and did a talk like this for their employees, because they knew they had this heliport, you know, but what about it? Because everything was literally destroyed in the 9/11. So I helped them try to reconstruct theirs. But looking around the map, there's so many of them. I wrote the Singer sewing machines. They had nothing. Bell System, they had nothing. You know, it's really sad how most of them have, you know, if they had it, they threw it away. Or you get guys like Jim, you know, some of the other collectors out here that have saved stuff. You know, people have some great collections that they can offer online, and those are some good sources.
The other question, one more final one, kind of fast forwarding almost up to the future. We know the New York City tried to get the Olympics, you know, for 2012, and they were, from what I had read and heard, they were planning to use much of the fairgrounds at Flushing Meadows for the for the Olympics venues. Was there any thought on anybody in the city here, in the area of New York, to possibly hold another World's Fair at some point there, albeit on a smaller scale? Because I know the previous two fairs lost a lot of money, and that's one of the reasons probably why the city and the state, as well as a lot of other investors, corporate and otherwise, kind of, never saw interest. Because I know I had read at some point that they were planning to have fairs about every 25 years in New York City at some point. So the next one would have been 1989-90, and then we would have had another one here in 2014-15. But was there ever any interest in trying to reuse part of Flushing Meadows Park for some smaller scale exhibition that could have drawn people, brought an economic development to the New York metro area?
Yeah, 1 second, Nancy. I see you waving. Yeah, there was talk about it, but what happened, unfortunately, was in 1984, the New Orleans World's Fair. had the dubious distinction of going bankrupt while it was operating. And the U.S. government at that point said, we're not putting any more money into World's Fairs because you have a political issue here. If you want to do a World's Fair in New York, why would the senator from South Dakota vote for it? Why would the senator from Pennsylvania vote for it? You know, that sort of thing. So they put in a moratorium that they would not participate in World's Fairs with any funding from the federal government whatsoever, including a U.S. pavilion. So since then, all the U.S. pavilions at any World's Fair has been funded by private industry, not by the U.S. government. So they finally have been reversing that, and I helped the State Department with some research material for Dubai and that. And they were like, yeah, we don't know why we don't do World's Fairs anymore. Well, it's because in 1984, the federal government voted no more World's Fairs. So you can still do it, but one of the things I personally, I'd love to see another World's Fair, and there's different ones been talked about it. If you were in Queens, would you really want them to tear out Flushing Meadows Park, you know, with the trees that have grown on the years and what, you know, what you've got now, and rip it all up, you know, have deal with all the traffic congestion and everything else, and then tear it all back down again. So more World's Fairs now are going to reusable structures or, you know, repurposing it. But I just don't think New York has the money for it. And there, like I said, there are talks about trying to do some World's Fair in the U.S. and LA talked about doing one that came and went. There's one I think they keep trying up in Minnesota someplace. And I'd love to see one, but Nancy, you had something you wanted to add? You were waving your hand?
A couple of things. I was born and raised in Flushing. My father's father was born in Corona. The site of the World's Fairs, now Flushing Meadow Corona Park, was at one time, actually before the 39 fair, was a dump. It was known as the Corona Dumps before they planned the World's Fair in 39. It was the one place you didn't want to go past because it smelled awful and they had ash heaps all over them. It was mostly ashes from people's coal stoves. Then they built the World's Fair and it was lovely. Of course, they didn't do anything with it with the war that came. Then they built the second World's Fair and everybody went. My parents went to both. My father actually bought half-price tickets because they were trying to build up people's excitement before the fair. So he had a business in Flushing and the Chamber of Commerce was selling half-price tickets. That's why I went all the time because he had all these tickets sitting at the store. So yeah, get on the subway for 15 cents. You went down to the World's Fair, spent the day, kept you out of trouble. But it was originally a swamp, and they were actually, I have a postcard from 1900. They were black oak trees growing there. My grandfather remembered them as a child, a young child. And then it became, they just were dumping ashes, so it was nothing. So what you have today has come like full circle from 110 years ago, 120 years ago. So I don't know if anybody would want you to destroy it now, although all the World's Fair people love it. So.
Yeah, we'll be going into that a bit next week with Albert's talk about the Great Gatsby and the dump. By the way, I'm just looking at the chat things off to the side. Michael Crawford mentioned he did a really nice recreation of the Ford Magic Skyway, and he's put the link down there if you see it in chat. It's a great fun to go back and again, you know, turn the clock back to 64, ride through it, and have a great time. So besides my website, I also run another site, worldsfaircommunity.org. And if any of you folks would like to join us over there, there's sites for each of the major World's Fairs. You can share your stuff, post your videos, you know, do whatever. And, you know, I just love to you know, virtually meet. I actually looking around, I've met you and I've met you, and you know, it's really nice to have met a whole bunch of you folks in person. So, and then some people I actually say, my God, this is the third or fourth talk you've been to. So we've got some lunatics out there, you know. My poor wife has to listen to these things. The rest of you folks, oh, she doesn't even have to. I see her. I'm watching her carefully, make sure she's still there. She's still there, but she had lunch. I saw that too. So. Well, great. Appreciate everybody joining us. And like I said, next Saturday at 10, Albert and I will be talking about the 39 and 64 World's Fair. The following Saturday, the 62 Seattle World's Fair. And we'll see what we come up with for the week after that. On my website, there's a little box, contact me. I'd love to get feedback, suggestions, any other questions, you know, ideas for future chats or whatever, and appreciate everybody joining.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you very much.
Well, appreciate everybody joining it.
Fantastic.
Bill.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Great. Talk to you all
Thank you.
soon. Bye.
Thank you, Bill.
Bye.